It's been a year since violence first broke out in KwaZulu-Natal before spilling over to Gauteng. The unrest was triggered by the arrest of former President Jacob Zuma. His incarceration followed his repeated refusal to appear before the state capture inquiry that he had established himself. The grand-scale looting claimed over, and the violence that was associated with it claimed over 350 lives and cost the economy no less than 70 billion rand. Our team of reporters, comprising of senior reporter Siphamandla Goge, Dasen Thathiah, Heidi Giokos, Slindelo Masikane and Masego Rahlaga will spend the next half an hour or so recapping on moments that stood out from their coverage. We start in KwaZulu-Natal, where we find senior reporters Siphamandla Goge and Dasen Thathiah. Siphamandla, let me start with you because, as we say in the introduction, the trigger point of this incident was around the issues around former President Jacob Zuma and the period of his incarceration for contempt of court. You were there in the build-up to his incarceration and the activities around Nkandla in the days prior. Did you have an inkling at the time that this could spill over and become as big as it turned out to be and as devastating as it turned out to be? Were there any signs that trouble was brewing?
Yes, there were signs that trouble was brewing. Jacob Zuma's supporters, former President Jacob Zuma's supporters, kept on threatening that should he be incarcerated, there was going to be chaos. And that is, I guess, what has left many people shocked and disappointed as to how come the law enforcement authorities did not foresee this happening, because on social media there were posts that were being circulated, WhatsApp messages, voice notes threatening that should he be arrested, there will be violence. So yes, there were signs even leading up to his incarceration, even on the day when he was expected to hand himself over to the police, the deadline for police minister and national police commissioner to have him arrested if he did not hand himself over. There were threats that were made by those who were supporting him to say, one, they were going to prevent police officers from coming to Nkandla and arresting him. But number two, if he's arrested, there was going to be action that was going to follow. So you got a sense that things were brewing. And I remember correctly, 2 days before that, if I'm not mistaken, myself and my camera colleague Bonga Mkize, we were coming back from Nongoma, somewhere on the N2 North Coast. That freeway was blockaded by people who said they were supporters of former President Jacob Zuma. They gave a hint 2 days before that, saying, come the deadline date, if he's arrested, there will be more. And I do not understand how law enforcement authorities did not foresee that one happening, whereas all the signs were there. It's something that we've been reporting about leading up to that moment of the former president's incarceration. So yes, it was expected, but I guess the question was the magnitude and scale of it. Maybe some people downplayed those threats, and maybe some people thought, well, it was just political talk, it was just threats. And many people did not foresee that the magnitude and the devastation was going to be severe, but definitely something was being publicly and openly discussed about it.
Yeah. And Siphamandla, we will never forget your extraordinary coverage into the early hours of the morning. You and the team, the various teams that were out there, including the team that captured the arrival of former President Jacob Zuma at Escort Correctional Facility. And then, Dasen, if you can come into this conversation then, what for you were the first signs after former President Jacob Zuma had been taken to the correctional facility that what we feared, what was rumored, the rumblings, were now starting to become reality?
I think my colleague Siphamandla just touched on it there. It was that road blockade there, because in fact, there was an irony there when we were talking about the N2 being blocked, because just that day, the police minister had held a parade with his officers, and the point of that was to talk about how peaceful that transition was. The extra deployments in the province, bloodshed was eliminated completely. Everything was peaceful, and they were celebrating that on that Friday morning. But on that very day, that was also the day that we started to see these interruptions, these trucks blocking the road, especially on the north. And later that day, we then saw it starting to pick up, because it seemed to spread, not just in the north, not just in the central part of the city, but it started to move out. So for me, those were the first signs of what was to come. In fact, we were out on the north coast during that weekend as well, and we started to see it there. There were farms that were being set alight. There was gunfire as we drove out to the area of Mpangeni. You would hear it in the dark as you drove. There were nyalas parked on the side of the road. So all of these things were not normal, and it just gave you a sense that something big was definitely coming. And that's exactly what happened just a few days later, as it just everything spiraled out of control, and we saw that mass looting and the violence that came after.
Yeah, let's bring in Heidi Giokos into the conversation. And as we mentioned, Heidi, the violence also spilled over to Gauteng as well, and you were part of the team that was covering it all. Just take me back to those moments, and what are the moments that for you are burnt and etched into your memory of covering those riots?
I've just never seen anything like this, Tulas. We've had moments of looting in this country where certain shops have been looted, but not to such a scale and not so devastating. I just remember seeing scenes at Jabulani Mall, at a number of malls in Soweto, where literally absolutely everything was taken. Everything was looted. You had people carrying, one man carrying washing machines, fridges by themselves. It was absolutely shocking to see and devastating to see that people within that community that were employed by these malls and these shopping centres and these shops were basically looting and taking from there. It was something, I'm going to repeat, I've never seen before. And when we were seeing it happening in KwaZulu-Natal, everybody was so worried that it would eventually trickle into other provinces as well. And that is exactly what happened. It came and moved into Gauteng, which was very much expected, because this is the economic hub. This is where the majority of our economy booms and thrives. Yeah. But I want us to listen to what some of business owners and people that were severely impacted by the looting had to say when this was all unfolding.
Yeah.
Stop there. We can't trade. I can't leave my staff hanging. I still had to pay them. They've even said to me, boss, even if you give us half our pay, don't run away.
Njengamabhizinisi amancane siphilela ngokuthengisa la emgwaqeni, senza ucraft sithengise wona. Asibange sisakwazi ukuthi sikhona ukuhlala emgwaqeni kube vele kunento yenzeke kanjena.
Started on Tuesday morning, in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Mob came here and then they stole half of our stock. And then on Tuesday night at around 11:30, I received a phone call that, they came in again. So they broke into the door, and then they took half of our stock again. And then earlier this morning, they took the rest. As you can see that the shop is empty. It's very devastating. And then as you can see what is happening here. So they took almost everything.
Okay. And Heidi, the extraordinary nature of the events, particularly as business, as they affected business and other people, is underscored by the amount of claims that the special risk insurance ended up receiving. 32 billion rand in total claims. They had to turn to National Treasury for them to boost them with 11 billion rand, because as much as their special risk insurance, they could never have predicted that that special risk would manifest in this way. I'll come back to you in a moment, and we will talk about the couch, Pablo. But before we do that, let's talk about the flat screen TV with Siphamandla Goge. It's no laughing matter, Siphamandla. There's a moment that became, it came to symbolize just how the lawlessness manifests itself, right? And the sense that people feeling that we are taking the stuff, there's nothing you can do about it. I remember the question you posed to that man in Pietermaritzburg and said, "Wenzani mtaka baba? What are you doing?" And, didn't even pay attention to, was not even bothered by the full glare of cameras. Take me back to those scenes that stand out for you, including that one.
Indeed. Well, we were in the midst of chaos and a very devastating situation, but some people were just, hell-bent on looting, trying to ensure that they grab whatever they can grab. And before I go further on that point, let me remind you that actually we started with our coverage a day before. You asked me a question earlier on were there any signs that this was going to happen? And I said to you, yes, simply because a day before we had gone to Moy River where more than 27 trucks were torched. And when we were doing that coverage at night, our first live crossing was at 11 p.m. People were threatening that come the following Monday, there was going to be a standstill. Nothing was going to be moving across KwaZulu-Natal. And it actually happened the way people had predicted. So, yes, signs were there. Even when we were in Kandla, people were openly shooting, discharging firearms.
Before you proceed, actually, what you are saying about Moy River, it really irritates me. Because anyone who knows about the history of Moy River and that highway that passes there, you don't need security training to know this, that if there was going to be trouble in KwaZulu-Natal, watch Moy River. How hard is that? It really gets to me every time you mention it, because there is a history of these incidents happening around that area, with the result that even now the police presence has been maintained in Moy River, because it would seem the penny has dropped after the fact that actually that's one of the spots that needed to be watched. Anyway, I interrupted you. Proceed. You were going to talk about the man and the television set and the chaos.
Indeed. So we found ourselves in Pietermaritzburg. In the morning, our day started off there. I think we were the first ones on the scene when the Brookside Mall was burning, when people had just set fire on Brookside Mall, one of the newly built malls. They were looting that mall. We brought those visuals live to our viewers. It was devastating to see that mall being on fire and people looting. So later on in the day, chaos had just spread across Pietermaritzburg. All parts of Pietermaritzburg were on fire, whether factories, liquor stores, and just any other thing that you can imagine, people were looting. So later on, we were in the CBD of Pietermaritzburg. That's where we spotted a large group of people making their way towards a game store. That's when we knew they were going to loot. And they started looting in front of members of the army. Remember, soldiers had just been deployed there, but there was nothing they could do. It was just to observe and serve as, a deterrent, but that couldn't help. So soldiers were there. Police were outnumbered. They had run out of rubber bullets because the whole day they were trying to chase people away. And people were just looting. And there's this gentleman who had helped himself, looted, I think, a 56-inch TV. He couldn't fit it inside the car. He really struggled. He had to make a plan, but it took a very long time. And we were just there filming that. And I think my colleague who was on air at that time was Sally Padet. And we were laughing at how the gentleman was struggling. But that was not a laughing matter, because it was just a situation of lawlessness and anarchy. Let's take a listen to how that whole episode played out. So I think at the center of it all, the gist is socio-economic challenges in the country, poverty, inequality and unemployment, but most importantly, the failure of our law enforcement. Look at people disembarking from cars here, going there to loot. Those gentlemen and those ladies there in that car, I can tell you that they are going there to get whatever they can get, as some people are busy looting. That's a 58-centimeter television screen, Sinotech. These gentlemen... Yeah. It's not going to fit. It's not going in. Yeah, that gentleman needs to make another plan. I can see he's trying to sort out the seats inside the car. But probably that thing costs thousands of rands, but someone has just taken it within a few minutes. So those who are looting here, some of them are not really that desperate to survive. If a person who's driving a car can come here with his car, surely not everyone who is looting here is unemployed or is struggling to survive. Some of the people are just pure criminals because they can afford to survive. The gentleman is really struggling. But anyway, our job is to bring it to life. He's trying to open the boot now. Let's see what his plan is. The boot is already full.
Wow. I mean, you know what, Sipha, I can understand you laughing because it's so insane what we are seeing, that there are law enforcement people around, but they're just unable to control what is going on. And it is actually staggering to watch. But clearly this man has a plan. He's determined to get that television. I'm Siphamandla, very briefly, because I need to speak to Nabila, who's in Durban City Centre. But what are you expecting tonight? Do you think it's going to calm down, or do you think it's going to intensify overnight?
Looters are adamant that things are going to intensify overnight. They are adamant that they will continue with their protest, as we expect President Ramaphosa to address the nation this evening. It remains to be seen what will happen, but obviously people are blaming law enforcement authorities and crime intelligence for not foreseeing this. The signs were there, posters were being circulated, messages were being circulated, but nothing has been done to prevent this anarchy. Look at this. This is just pure anarchy. People are just looting. And, you know, the question is, why did the authorities not foresee this? And if they did foresee it, why did they not do something to prevent it? Did they basically downplay the situation? What happened?
Yeah. And I'm wondering at what point this gentleman is going to realise that we are filming absolutely everything he is doing. And, you know, it would be fascinating to get his story. He probably just thinks it's maybe an opportunity to get something he hasn't had before. And, you know, if there's a sense of it...
We can go to the gentleman. Bongamkhize, can we unmount this camera and go to the gentleman? Uyamhlonishwa. Uyazabalaza mntaka baba. Yini kwenze njani dude? Wemfo. Yini kwenze njani? Mfo yini? The gentleman doesn't want to say much except that he's just, and his car is not starting. The guy is really struggling with starting his car. But anyway, we are laughing about it, but on a serious note, this is a serious matter really. The gentleman is coming back with a sack of meat. They've just looted now. Untshontshe wemfo ima untshontshe nokuqala uzoboshwa nje untshontshe
ima yazini into esilwela la yazini usuzuma aphume lapha ejele abe free
manje untshontshelani pho lemisa abalenyama
asiyathatha bafethu umzabalazo namaphoyisa ayeza manje nibe right bafethu
untshontshelile musukubaleka walinde la maphoyisa mfowethu
angibaleke ufuna usini kayise kumina
manje ngoba buka na uqokile nje phela ubukeka engathi
ngiphosa lo mthetho mina ngiphosa lo mthetho
uzophela lo msebenzi wakho leli torho lakho lizophela
bengigcotshiwe ngiphosa lo mthetho mina nibe right nazi into zakhiwa bafethu.
Okay, sure. Well, the gentleman appears to be a security guard. That's really shocking. He has just stole meat here, and then look at what other people are still doing there. Sorry, basically, people are looting here. They are looting a butchery in Pietermaritzburg. Look at that, and gonna ask Bongamkhize to stop now. And then police were here trying to ensure that. Well, the gentleman says, let's see what...
Sure, the irony there, Siphamandla, of that gentleman wearing a security guard uniform, private security meant to plug the gap of policing in this country, and yet those are the scenes that were playing themselves out in that, you know, various people, including some, we are told, who work in government, were actually part of the scenes of chaos that we were seeing. Dasen, I'll come back to you in a moment because I want to get your sense. You had the sad occasion to view all of this from the skies. But before I come to you, let's bring in eNCA's Masego Rahlaga. And Masego, you were part of the team covering this situation from here in Gauteng. Just your own reflections, the scenes that you will never forget that you witnessed in and around Gauteng.
Well, Tulas, I remember I actually only joined the team about on the third day or so, on the Tuesday. So I remember on the Monday, I happened to be covering, I think, the Senzo Meyiwa case when it was still in the magistrates court and before it was transferred to the High Court. So that Monday, I had a big story to cover. But that Tuesday morning, I was then sent to Alexandra, where the situation was quite tense. And I remember when we arrived there with my colleague Teddy Muyembani, I had to, for most of that time, for most of that morning, crossing live to Tumelo Motutwane and Gareth Edwards, I was not on screen. And I had to explain to the team and the viewers that I'm not on screen because in Alexandra, the looting is going on unabated, uninterrupted, and there were no police officers there for several hours. I had to actually start making calls to the police officers that I knew in that area to say that they needed to come there. So I had to not be on the screen and rather opted to be behind Teddy and basically just hold him by his jacket to pull him to the right direction so that, I could sort of be protection for him. So everything was going unabated that morning. At some point, police did arrive. But I remember, Tulas, police were actually quite under-resourced. They were outnumbered by the public that was there. And at some point, the public was even basically just toying with police. At some point, police would do the whole rubber bullets and stun grenades, and the crowd would disperse. But then because they knew and they realized that police were outnumbered, they would keep coming back and they would keep telling the police that they're going to come back, they want to feed their kids, etc. So, one scene that played out to me was, of course, after that Monday when the president and then Minister of Defense, Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula, actually communicated that they would have the soldiers come out. I happened to be in Alexandra where we first saw the scenes of the soldiers actually coming onto the streets to basically assist police. At some point in Alexandra, police even ran out of rubber bullets. They had to start protecting each other and retreat, basically, and leave us journalists, with the protesters, not being able to basically maintain law and order. So here's a snippet of basically when the SANDF arrived in the streets of Alexandra. At some point, Teddy and I were not even sure. Tulas, I remember I was on air for 3 hours. We were with our then colleague Clement Mangatela. His show had just started at 3 p.m. and I was live with him from 3 p.m. And because the soldiers arrived during this crossing, and it was the first time that they arrived on the scene, Teddy and I were on air for about 2.5 to 3 hours, because not so long after the soldiers arrived, the Minister of Police also then arrived there, and many other ministers that arrived there. But here's a snippet of what happened when Teddy and I realized that the soldiers were there. I was out of breath. At some point, I was screaming. I sounded excited to some viewers, but actually I was trying to catch my breath. But here's a snippet of what happened when the soldiers eventually arrived in Alexandra.
People are scattered everywhere, still carrying those things that they have looted. They're not letting go of that. Some of them have actually even stolen the trolleys from the stores that they looted in the mall to go steal from the shops outside. Those are definitely rubber bullets, Clement. Police are here, definitely they're back. So people are scattering all over the place. And the worry, I'm seeing a woman who's carrying a young, small baby on her back. And of course, when this happens, there's a lot of chaos. So they're running everywhere, but they still have their groceries in their hands, Clement. These groceries that they've stolen, they are not letting go of those. So as soon as I see exactly where the police are coming from, we'll be able to give you that shot, Clement. But definitely it's coming from the direction that we're showing you, where people are running. Some of them actually, Clement, while police shoot the rubber bullets and the stun grenades, they actually...
Let's go to Dasen Thathiah now. And Dasen, and I'll come back to you in a moment, Heidi. We'll end off on the issue of Pablo. Dasen, one of the unique vantage points that you had was aerially. So it's one thing to report from, street level. You are not elevated. You're not able to take in the full scale of the devastation. One of the things I remember from your coverage is just the number of billows of smoke that you were seeing from the skies as warehouses were emptied out and burned to ashes. Pick it up from there. Just that vantage point, what we couldn't hear, what we couldn't smell and pick up with our senses, that you were able to pick up while you were up in the skies.
Well, Tulos, let me contextualize this. While I've been listening to my colleagues, I was looking around me here on Queen Nandi Drive where we are standing. And, you know, there were two parts to that coverage. The one was, yes, we had that vantage point, but we were also here on the ground, and we kind of had a balance of both of these views, and that really gave us a holistic view. So when I stand on this particular road is that just down this road, and all of this on the same day, mind you, just down this road, we were with private security when we heard the first of the gunfire for that night. There were some residents that were gathered here. They opened fire on a car that had driven past. We were there. I was doing a live crossing. We ended up getting into a car chase. Just about an hour later on that day, we'd come up the road. That's when looters thought that they were under attack. They'd formed something of a distribution point on this road. So as we got out of the vehicle, once again, we heard gunfire. I literally heard bullets whizzing past us. And it just, you know, sometimes when you think back to that time, you wonder if it all really occurred. And the reason all of that was happening here was because some of the biggest warehouses in Durban are located in this area. So Massmart was one of those that was under attack. You're talking about the aerial visuals that we brought to you. That was one of the buildings that where we showed you live looting taking place. The road that you're seeing now, which is fairly bare, this was the road where all of those vehicles were in a traffic jam, with cars just parked here and everyone making their way to that warehouse to loot. The first time we got into that chopper and we took our viewers up there with us and showed them those visuals, I think it was an eye-opener. But this is something that our viewers didn't really realize. That like them and the shock that they were experiencing, I was experiencing the same kind of shock. My colleague Nkaniso, who was capturing those visuals, he was also in shock because we were watching this happen to our own city and we were looking at what was unfolding. Yeah. And that's when you really get a sense of it, because we were living this experience. So it's something that and those images will always be etched in my mind.
And I'm glad you bring that up, Dasen, your own experience, because, you know, not only are you journalists thrive on the big stories, but also this is watching your own country burn, literally burn. And I can imagine, I know what it does to you as you are watching it all and thinking, will my children have a future in this country? Will there be a country to speak of as we move forward? Heidi, let's come back to you as we come to a close. There were many heroes, the people that guarded infrastructure in their communities and said, this will not be looted on our watch. Tugela Ferry Mall, they used cooking oil and spread it on the floor, and the looters would slip every time they tried to go into the ShopRite, Checkers and other stores at Tugela Ferry Mall. But also legends were born, Heidi. Pablo became famous.
Pablo was
Who's
born.
Pablo? I didn't know this.
Pablo is a very famous blue couch. I know it's not a laughing matter, but, you know, South Africans always find a way to...
Heidi.
Always. We always find a way yes, to laugh about these things. But Pablo was a very long blue couch, 70,000 Rand blue couch that was looted. And images of this blue couch emerged in an informal settlement outside a shack with two women sitting on that blue couch. It was obviously not able to fit into the shack, and this is why it was outside. What's interesting, though, is that Pablo was eventually found, apparently, by the police, and it seems as though there's just one armrest that's still missing. What's interesting, there's an article that's written about it and said that armrest is probably attached to another couch now, and it's probably found a new home. But this couch just became so popular because people started turning it into a meme, turning it into a video, saying, actually making the couch speak and saying, why am I here? This is very unusual. I'm an Italian leather couch that cost 70,000 Rand. where am I? This is not my normal environment.
Yeah.
Where's the house? Where are the walls? So it became very funny, but it seems as though Pablo has found a new house, and it will always be remembered.
And went on a tour, a year-long tour of taking pictures.
Yes. It's brilliant. I'll actually tweet some of the photos so our viewers can go have a look. It finished me. I could not believe how people actually turned this into something to laugh about and to say, actually, it's not all doom and gloom.
It's a complex story, Heidi. There were moments when, you know, we were really on the edge as South Africans. I've got to thank you for coming through and reflecting on that. And I can't leave without mentioning that there were also a lot of villains. Read the Africa Panel of Experts report and you will find those villains. Many of them reside within the executive branch of government. That's really one of the main findings that came out from there. But you know them yourself, some of the villains that let us down during that period. I'm back with